Hello, team players. There's one class I haven't covered that got new options in Howl the Wild, and believe it or not, it's the Bard. Let's dive in. So let's start with the big one, the brand new Bard Muse. Yeah, that's right, we now have the Zoophonia Muse. In keeping with the theme of this book, this is a nature-based muse. So if it's a creature, it might be something like an enlightened animal or a spirit guide. If it's a deity, it might be the Warden of the Wild, Gazra, or another representative of nature. You gain the Zoophonic Communication feat and the Summon Animal spell. With the Zoophonic Communication feats, you can make requests of animals using performance rather than diplomacy, as though you shared a language with them. But this does not grant you the ability to understand their responses. You can also use performance instead of nature to command an animal. If you want to play a bard that uses animals in their performance, this is definitely the muse for you. And a bard with an animal companion seems like a pretty interesting build to me. And the rest of the options that I'm going to talk about in this video make it even better. If you build your character right with this muse, you could have an entire animal-themed band, just based on a single character, which I think is pretty cool. Now, let's talk about some of the other feats you can pick up in this book, starting with Bestial Snarling. For one action, you can attempt a nature or performance check, and compare it to the will DC of every enemy adjacent to you. If you have an animal minion, such as a summoned animal or an animal companion, you can also compare this roll to the will DC of all enemies adjacent to them as well. Every enemy that you succeed against is frightened 1. If the target happens to be an animal, they're frightened 2. However, regardless of how you did against a creature, it is immune to this feat for 10 minutes after that. This will be really good for any bard, but unfortunately, it does require the Zoophonia Muse, as does every feat I'm going to talk about today. But if you've got an animal companion, I would definitely consider this one, as your animal companion is more than likely going to be large at some point, which means there might be a ton of enemies around it. And you get to roll against all of them, plus any enemies that are adjacent to you. And especially at low levels, animals are something you're going to run into a lot, which means you'll be getting that frightened 2 quite a bit, as animals are one of the most common types of creatures you'll face, especially at low levels. I definitely recommend this feat if you are a Zoophonia bard. Of course, even if you're not, you can always take Multifarious Muse and pick up the Zoophonia Muse if you want. For our level 4 feat from this book, we've got Zoophonic Composition. Once per day, when you cast a composition spell, you can either sustain a summon animal spell or command an animal as a free action. Keep in mind, this is any composition spell. So this works with your composition cantrips as well as your non-cantrip composition spells. Great action economy here. It's just a shame that it's only a once per day thing. But if you need to cast a 2-action composition spell and command your animal to do something and move, this is the way to do it. Then we've got 2 8th level feats in this book, starting with Ears of the Forest. When you seek, if there are willing animals in the area, you can borrow their senses. This means you can seek with sense and tremor sense as imprecise senses. You can also use any other senses of animals in the area, depending on GM's discretion. So like, if there are bats in the area, you could technically use something like an imprecise version of echolocation if your GM allows it. But overall, this is definitely more of an out-of-combat feat, but can be useful if you're looking for something. It all depends on your game and what your GM throws at you. But for our second level 8 feat, we've got Songbird's Call. That gives you the composition spell of the same name, which I'll talk about at the end of this video. Now, we don't get another feat from this book until level 12 with Chorus Companion. This one requires the Zoophonia Muse as well as a mature animal companion. Your animal companion becomes trained in performance, or expert if it was already trained. When you cast a composition spell, you can have it originate from either you or your animal companion, assuming that your animal companion is within 30 feet of you. Unfortunately, I don't think this feat is very good. The reason is that most of the spells that you would want to have emanate from your animal companion instead of you already have pretty high ranges. I mean, a 60-foot emanation is already a huge area. Even a 30-foot emanation is still pretty big. The only one that I see that you might want to cast through your animal companion is Pied Piping. And that's because that's only a 5-foot emanation. But that's a level 20 feat to get that. So I mean, honestly, not that great of a feat here. However, it is good with the Songbird's Call focus spell that I'll talk about later. But honestly, that and Pied Piping are like the only spells I would use with this feat. Musical Summons at level 14, however, is insane. For 3 actions, you can cast Summon an Animal and a 1-action composition spell. Meaning essentially you can summon something with your summon animal and still keep up your Courageous Anthem, or any other 1-action composition spell. If you want both effects on subsequent rounds, you do have to sustain your summon animal and recast your Courageous Anthem or whatever composition spell. But this is still fantastic action economy. Getting to do 2 things when you could normally only do 1 is pretty insane. I highly recommend this feat. And finally, at level 18, we have Pack Performance. If a creature disrupts or counteracts a spell you're casting, and you have an animal minion within 30 feet of you, as a reaction, the animal minion can stride and strike the triggering creature. If this attack hits, your spell isn't disrupted or counteracted. I'm afraid this one is another situational feat as well, as a creature must disrupt or counteract the spell you're casting, which there are very few creatures that you'll face that can even do that. Unless, of course, they happen to critically hit you with a reactive strike. But reactive strike is pretty rare as well. Bottom line here is this feat just isn't worth taking at level 18. If this was a lower level feat, I'd say maybe, depending on your campaign. But it's just not worth a level 18 feat slot, as you will just hardly ever use it. Granted, it is good when it comes up. It is a reaction that allows your animal to do stuff that it would normally only be able to do if you commanded it. But again, I really don't think you're going to use this very often, if at all. Okay, one more thing to talk about in this video, and that is, of course, the new composition spell. For 2 actions, you create a 15-foot emanation of birds whirling around you in a 15-foot emanation. This follows the general rules for concealment. In addition, any creature other than you that enters or ends its turn in the area takes 1d6 piercing damage, plus an additional 1d6 piercing damage for every 2 ranks beyond 4th. So effectively, this is concealment plus a little bit of damage. Overall, not a great spell here. Granted, in the right situation, it can be good, but only because of the concealment. Otherwise, it's just piercing damage. Not a huge fan of this spell, but maybe you guys can figure out a way to use it for teamwork that I haven't figured out. And that's all the new options for the Bard in Howl the Wild. Overall, I definitely think that some of these options are really good. Unfortunately, some of them are way too situational to be any good. But Bard is one of my favorite classes, so I'm glad to see they're getting more options. As I said before, I can definitely see a Bard build where they have a bunch of animal companions and use them as a band. But if you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like and do all that other YouTube stuff. And if you're interested in getting my videos early, you can become a member of this channel. Or if you want to get my videos ad-free, you can join me on my Patreon page. Links to both of these are in the description of this video. But maybe you're more interested in which options from this book. If so, I got a video for that right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.